All right, let's dive into something pretty interesting today, something that you sent us about how the Air Force picks its future leaders. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the process for promoting staff sergeants to technical sergeant. Now, you shared some documents about the Enlisted Force Distribution Panel, which most people just call the EFDP.
Right.
And that's going to be happening in fiscal year 2025. And this is really the process that's shaping the very top of the enlisted force. And, I got to say, just looking at this document, it's a bit dense.
Yeah.
But I think we can pull out some really interesting things about what the Air Force is really looking for when they're choosing those who are going to lead the enlisted force.
Exactly. And I think one of the big things that we'll see in these documents is how focused they are, not just on who gets promoted, but why they get promoted. And I think a big part of this is the world. We're living in this world of great power competition.
Right.
Countries like China and Russia are really starting to challenge the U.S. on the global stage.
Yeah.
And the Air Force has to be ready for anything from cyber attacks to conflicts in space. And to be ready for that, to be ready for all of that, they need to have the best possible leaders at every level. And that starts with the technical sergeant.
Absolutely. So, a great power competition, that's kind of a scary thought. But it makes sense that it puts a lot of pressure on the Air Force to really pick the right people for these leadership positions. So how does this EFDP actually work? What's the secret sauce?
Yeah, so the EFDP is really designed to do one thing, and that's to select the top 15% of eligible staff sergeants for promotion to technical sergeant.
Okay.
So think of it like this. We're going to take the best of the best, and only those folks are going to be recommended for promotion.
Okay, so we're talking about the top 5% are promote now.
Exactly.
And then the next 10% are must promote.
That's right.
Okay, so they're really narrowing it down.
They really are. And the way they do it is actually really interesting. They use something called the 4 Major Performance Areas, or MPAs.
Okay, MPAs, that sounds important. Tell me more.
They're like the 4 pillars of what the Air Force wants to see in a really great technical sergeant.
Okay, so break it down for me. What are these 4 MPAs?
So the first one is executing the mission.
Yeah.
And this is pretty straightforward. It's all about getting the job done and doing it well.
Right. So if you're a staff sergeant, you've got to be able to execute the mission.
Exactly.
But it's got to be more than just, checking the boxes or going through the motions.
Right. It's not just about being competent. It's about being proactive. It's about being a problem solver, taking initiative and using critical thinking.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was thinking about this, and I remember I worked with a team one time where everyone had the technical skills, but there was this one person who always seemed to anticipate problems before they even happened. They weren't the most senior person on the team, but they just had this way of thinking ahead and figuring out how to avoid those roadblocks. And everyone looked to them as a leader, even though, their rank didn't really reflect that yet.
And that is executing the mission at its best. It's that ability to think critically and proactively that really sets someone apart. And that's what the EFDP panel is looking for. It's not just following orders. It's about taking ownership and driving results.
Okay, I can see that. All right, so that's executing the mission. What's next?
All right, so MPA number 2 is leading people. And this one's absolutely crucial because a technical sergeant is going to be in a position where they are supervising and mentoring others.
Yeah, for sure. You're not just doing the job yourself anymore. You're responsible for helping other people do their jobs too.
Exactly. So leading people is about way more than just giving orders or delegating tasks.
Right. It's not just about being the boss.
Right. And this is where things get a little more nuanced.
I had this one supervisor once who was technically brilliant, amazing at their job, but man, they just couldn't figure out the people part of leadership. They'd get so frustrated when someone didn't understand something right away, and they just weren't good at giving feedback in a way that actually helped people grow.
Yeah, and that's why leading people is so important. It's all about emotional intelligence.
Okay, I hear a lot about that these days.
Yeah, and for good reason. It's about being self-aware, managing your own emotions, understanding the perspectives of others, building trust and rapport, motivating and developing your team members.
So it's like you're not just the smartest person in the room. You're creating an environment where everyone feels valued and empowered to contribute.
Exactly.
That's cool.
And effective communication is a huge part of this active listening, giving, and receiving feedback constructively.
Oh, yeah. Communication is key in any relationship, really.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's 2 down 2 to go. What's the next MPA on the list?
All right. MPA number 3 is all about managing resources. And this one's really about being a good steward of everything under your control.
So we're talking about time, equipment, personnel, even the budget.
A technical sergeant needs to be able to look at all of that, allocate resources, effectively prioritize tasks, and make decisions that maximize efficiency.
So it's kind of like being the CEO of your own little operation, making sure everything runs smoothly and you're getting the most bang for your buck.
That's a great way to put it. The EFDP panel is looking for evidence that an airman can manage resources responsibly, make sound decisions, and find ways to optimize performance, even when they don't have everything they might want.
That's a tough one for sure.
It is, but it's essential for a leader at this level.
Okay, so we've got one MPA left. What's the final piece of the puzzle?
All right, the final MPA is all about improving the unit. And this is where things get really interesting because it's about going above and beyond.
So it's not just about maintaining the status quo, it's about constantly striving to make things better.
Exactly. It's about having that proactive mindset, identifying areas for improvement, and taking the initiative to make those improvements happen.
So it's about innovation, coming up with new ideas, thinking outside the box.
Absolutely. And it's about being willing to take calculated risks to improve processes, enhance efficiency, boost morale within the unit.
So it's about leaving things better than you found them.
That's a great way to think about it.
I like that a lot. Okay, so we've got these 4 MPAs, and I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. We talked about great power competition earlier and how the Air Force needs to be ready for anything. But how do these MPAs actually connect to that bigger picture? Like, how does improving the unit directly contribute to the Air Force's success in this, crazy world we're living in?
That's a really good question, and I think it highlights why these MPAs are so important. Let's stick with improving the unit for a second. In a world of, constantly evolving technology and increasingly sophisticated threats, the Air Force can't afford to just sit back and relax.
Right, got to stay ahead of the game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They need leaders at every level who are constantly looking for ways to improve, to enhance efficiency, to find new and innovative solutions to complex problems.
So it's not just about making things a little bit better in your own little corner of the Air Force. It's about fostering a culture of innovation that can really help the Air Force maintain its edge.
And this applies to all 4 MPAs. Think about executing the mission in a complex and unpredictable world. Leaders need to be able to adapt to changing circumstances, make decisions under pressure, and find creative ways to accomplish the mission, even when facing unexpected challenges.
Right. Makes sense. And then there's leading people, which I think becomes even more important when you consider, the diverse backgrounds and perspectives of today's airmen. You need leaders who can build cohesive teams, foster inclusion, and create an environment where everyone feels valued and empowered to contribute their unique skills and talents.
Absolutely. And when it comes to managing resources, well, the Air Force has a finite budget.
Sadly, yes.
And those resources need to be allocated wisely to ensure the service can meet its current operational demands while also investing in the capabilities needed to address future challenges.
Right. So it's not just about being frugal. It's about making strategic decisions that will really position the Air Force for success in the long term. Okay, I'm starting to see how all of these pieces fit together. But I'm still kind of curious. How does the EFDP actually measure these qualities? I mean, it's one thing to say we're looking for leaders who can execute the mission, but how do they actually assess that? What does that look like in practice?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. We're going to dive into that in the next part of our deep dive.
Sounds good. Can't wait. Okay, so we're back, and we're really going to kind of get into the nuts and bolts of how the Air Force evaluates these MPAs. I've got to admit, I'm kind of picturing this, super serious room full of officers, scrutinizing every little detail of an airman's career like it's some top secret selection process.
Well, it is a thorough process, but it's not quite as, cloak and dagger as you might imagine.
Okay.
So the EFTP panel is actually made up of senior NCOs.
Yeah.
Master sergeants.
Good.
Senior master sergeants.
Yeah.
And they're carefully selected to represent diverse backgrounds and career fields.
Mm-hmm.
And then they even go through specific training to make sure they really understand this process and that they can evaluate records fairly and consistently.
Oh, so it's not just a bunch of generals up there making these decisions.
No. It's folks who really understand what it takes to be a great SNCO.
Okay, so they're the ones who are looking at all these records, but what exactly are they looking at?
So they review each airman's record, and this includes things like their career data brief, that summarizes their assignments, their training, their awards.
Right.
They look at decorations, which are, medals and ribbons for things like meritorious service or achievements.
Okay.
And of course, they really scrutinize the last 3 performance evaluations, which we call EPRs. And that's really a detailed assessment of an airman's performance and their potential
Yeah.
as seen by their direct supervisors.
So it's really like they're putting together this big puzzle.
Oh, yes.
They're trying to get a really complete picture of an airman's entire career, all their accomplishments.
Exactly.
But wouldn't that make it tough to compare someone who's had, say, multiple deployments to a war zone with someone who's been stationed stateside their whole career? I mean, wouldn't their experiences and opportunities be totally different?
That is a really great question. And it's something that the EFDP really takes very seriously. So the panel is specifically instructed to consider the context of each airman's assignments and the opportunities they've had when they're evaluating their performance.
Okay, so it's not like this one-size-fits-all approach.
No, it's definitely not.
They're taking the time to really understand each individual's career path and what they've been able to accomplish. But how does that actually work in practice?
Okay, so let's say you have two staff sergeants who are up for promotion. One has been deployed, multiple times to these high-stress environments, and the other one has served primarily in stateside support roles. The panel would consider the unique challenges and the leadership opportunities that are inherent in each of those environments when they're evaluating how well each airman has performed against those MPAs.
So for the airman who's been deployed, they might look for evidence of how they performed under pressure, how they led their team in really difficult situations, how they adapted to those challenging environments. And then for the airman who's been stateside, they might focus on how they've maximized, the opportunities for professional development that they've had, or how they've taken initiative to improve processes, or how they've mentored others, or how they've demonstrated leadership within their specific role.
That's right.
So it's kind of like they're saying, we understand that not everyone has the same opportunities, but we want to see that you've made the most of the ones that you've had.
Yes.
That's really cool.
It's about looking at the individual and what they've done with what they've been given.
Yeah, I'm starting to appreciate how much thought and consideration goes into this process.
Oh, yeah. It's very thorough, and it goes even deeper than that. The panel is also instructed to consider any limitations an airman might have faced, like a non-rated period.
Right.
Which is, a period of time when they weren't eligible for evaluation, maybe due to medical leave or, being assigned to a special duty. So they wouldn't be penalized for not having, a performance evaluation during that time.
Okay, that makes sense. So it really is about leveling the playing field and recognizing that, everyone's career path is different. But what about formal education? I mean, the Air Force is always pushing, get your degree, get your PME.
Right.
Does that count for anything in this process?
That's an interesting question. While education is definitely valuable in the Air Force, at a staff sergeant to technical sergeant promotion level, it's not a primary factor.
Really?
Yeah.
I would have thought that having a college degree or completing, some of that advanced PME would give you a leg up. Why wouldn't they consider that?
Well, it reflects a shift in focus at this stage of an airman's career. At this point, the Air Force is really focused on demonstrated performance and leadership potential.
Okay.
They want to see evidence that you can apply your skills and knowledge in real-world situations.
So it's less about what you know and more about what you can do with what you know.
That's a great way to put it. They want to see how you've executed the mission, how you've led people, how you've managed resources, and how you've improved your unit. Those are the qualities that really matter at the technical sergeant level. Now, of course, education and professional development are still encouraged, and they will definitely become more important as an airman, progresses in their career. But at this particular stage, it's about demonstrating your ability to lead and make a real impact.
Okay, so they're looking at your actual performance, not just, the pieces of paper that you've collected along the way.
That's right.
I like that. Okay, so that makes sense. But what about those cases where an airman might have some negative information in their record, like maybe a disciplinary action or, a not so great performance report? Does that automatically disqualify them?
Not at all. The panel is instructed to carefully weigh any negative information against the airman's entire record.
So it's not like a one strike and you're out kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely not. They look at the severity of the issue, how long ago it happened, whether there's been a pattern of behavior, and most importantly, how the airman has performed since then.
So if someone made a mistake early in their career but has really, demonstrated improvement and growth since then, the panel will take that into consideration.
Exactly. It's about looking at the whole picture, not just focusing on one isolated incident.
Okay, that's good to know. It sounds like the Air Force is really trying to be fair and really get a holistic view of each individual.
Yeah, they really are. And to make sure that happens, the entire process is incredibly confidential. Panel members are actually sworn to secrecy. They can't discuss any details of the process or the individuals being considered.
Wow, so no gossiping about who got snubbed for promotion at the water cooler.
Nope, not a word.
Got it.
It's all very tightly controlled to protect the integrity of the process and the privacy of the airmen involved.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that level of confidentiality is super important, just to maintain trust and make sure the process is seen as, fair and impartial. But I've got to ask, even with all of that, there's always that chance of unconscious bias creeping in, even with the best of intentions. So how does the Air Force try to address that?
That's a great question. And you're right. Unconscious bias can affect, any decision-making process, and the Air Force takes that very seriously.
Yeah.
So they've implemented a number of safeguards to try to mitigate bias in the EFDP. First, as I mentioned earlier, the panel composition is designed to be diverse, with members from different backgrounds, different career fields, different experiences. And that helps make sure that a wider range of perspectives are considered.
So it's not just a room full of pilots making decisions about everyone else.
Exactly. They also go through specific training on recognizing and mitigating bias.
Oh, wow.
They're taught to be aware of their own potential biases.
Yeah.
And to really focus on, those objective criteria outlined in the MPAs. Remember, those MPAs provide a standardized framework, so it helps the panel focus on specific performance factors and not, subjective opinions or personal preferences.
So those MPAs really are the key to the whole thing.
They are.
Okay, that's good to know. It sounds like they're really putting a lot of effort into making this a fair and transparent process. But even with all of that, there's still that element of human judgment involved. How can they be sure that everyone is being evaluated on a truly level playing field?
That's where the concept of calibration comes in.
Oh, okay.
So before the panel even starts reviewing records, they go through this calibration exercise. And they're reviewing and scoring a sample set of records together.
Okay.
And this helps make sure that everyone is interpreting the criteria in the same way and that they're applying consistent standards across the board.
So it's like making sure everyone's speaking the same language and using the same ruler to measure
Right.
performance. That's a good way to put it. So what happens after the panel has finished all of their deliberations? Do they just, send out a notice in the mail saying, congratulations, you've been promoted, or sorry, you didn't make the cut?
Well, it's a little more involved than that. So the EFDP recommendations carry a lot of weight, but they are just recommendations.
Okay.
The final promotion authority actually rests with the Air Force Secretary.
Oh, wow. So it's not even the panel making the final decision.
That's right.
But I imagine their recommendations have a pretty big influence on the outcome.
They do. Their recommendations are based on that deep dive into each airman's record, and it really reflects the collective judgment of this group of experienced leaders who've been specifically trained for this task.
So it's like having a team of expert talent scouts who've carefully vetted all the candidates.
That's a great way to think about it.
I like that.
And these recommendations help ensure that the Air Force is really promoting the best and the brightest to lead the way in this era of great power competition.
You keep mentioning great power competition. I'm curious how that factors into the panel's thinking. Are they specifically looking for certain skills or experiences that might be, more relevant to this global landscape that we're in now? Because it is a very different world than it was even a decade ago.
Absolutely, and that's a really good observation. While the MPAs themselves don't, explicitly say we need more cyber warriors or we need more space experts,
Yeah.
the qualities they emphasize, like leadership, problem-solving, adaptability, innovation,
Yeah.
those things are all inherently aligned with the challenges of great power competition.
So it's less about, having specific technical skills and more about having that ability to learn to adapt, to lead in this rapidly changing world.
Exactly.
Okay.
The Air Force needs leaders who can think critically, make decisions under pressure, and find creative solutions to complex problems. They need people who can lead and inspire diverse teams, manage resources effectively, and constantly strive to improve the organization. Those are the qualities that will ensure that the Air Force remains the dominant force in the air and space domains for decades to come.
Wow, this is really eye-opening. It's amazing to see how much thought goes into, selecting the Air Force's future leaders.
Mm-hmm.
But there's one more thing I'm curious about. We've talked a lot about, what the Air Force is looking for in a potential technical sergeant. But what about the flip side? Are there any, red flags or warning signs that might make the panel, hesitate to recommend someone for promotion? What are some things that could potentially derail an airman's chances of making that jump to the next level of leadership?
That's a great question, and it's one we'll explore in more detail in the final part of our deep dive.
Ooh, cliffhanger. All right. Well, I can't wait. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Air Force's enlisted force distribution panel. And we've talked a lot about what makes a great candidate, what the Air Force is looking for in those future technical sergeants. But now I kind of want to flip the script and talk about, the other side of that coin. What are some of those red flags that might make the panel hesitate when they're considering someone for promotion?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, it's important to remember that the panel is really looking for well-rounded leaders, airmen who embody all four of those MPAs that we talked about. So one red flag might be, an airman who's really strong in one area, but shows some, significant weaknesses in others. Like maybe they're incredible at executing the mission, always exceeding expectations when it comes to their technical specialty, but they just can't seem to figure out the leading people part. Maybe their communication skills need some work, or they haven't really demonstrated that they can effectively mentor and develop others.
So it's not enough to just be, technically proficient. You need to have that leadership potential too. But what if it's not a case of, extreme strengths and weaknesses? What if an airman is consistently meeting expectations in all four MPAs, but they're not really exceeding them in any of them? Would that be a cause for concern?
That's a really good question. And, it's important to remember that the EFDP is designed to select the top 15% of those eligible staff sergeants. So we're talking about the folks who are truly ready to step into that technical sergeant role and really lead effectively from day one. Yeah. So while consistently meeting expectations is good, it might not be enough to really stand out in this process. It's very competitive. The panel is really looking for evidence of that potential. Those individuals who are not just meeting the standards, but pushing beyond them, seeking out new challenges and really demonstrating that commitment to continuous improvement.
So it's not just about doing your job well, it's about showing that you're constantly striving to learn, to grow, to develop as a leader.
Exactly. They want to see that spark, that drive to excel and to really make a positive impact. And this is where those, softer skills that we talked about earlier become really important. Communication, emotional intelligence, teamwork adaptability. If an airman is really strong technically, but they're constantly struggling with those interpersonal skills, that could be a big red flag.
Yeah. I've seen that firsthand, how a lack of emotional intelligence can really derail a team. I worked with a supervisor once who was brilliant technically, but they had zero self-awareness. They would micromanage everything, get defensive if anyone offered suggestions, and they just couldn't read the room at all when it came to understanding how their actions were impacting the team's morale. It was toxic, and it really hurt the team's effectiveness.
And that's a perfect example of why emotional intelligence is so important, especially at that leadership level. The panel will be looking for evidence of those skills. Self-awareness, empathy, the ability to build rapport and motivate others to give and receive feedback constructively. If an airman is consistently showing a lack of emotional intelligence, that would definitely raise some concerns about their readiness to lead.
Okay, so we've talked about being well-rounded, exceeding expectations, and those soft skills. What about initiative? Does that play a role in the evaluation?
Absolutely. The panel wants to see that an airman is being proactive, seeking out opportunities for professional development, volunteering for leadership roles, taking ownership of their career progression. Remember, we talked about continuous improvement and adaptability? Well, the panel is looking for people who really embody those qualities, people who aren't just content with the status quo, but are actively trying to grow and learn and contribute at a higher level.
So they're looking for the folks who aren't just ready for that next challenge, but are actually seeking it out.
Exactly. And it really says a lot about the kind of leaders the Air Force is trying to develop. They want people who are hungry for growth, who are passionate about their work, and who are dedicated to making a difference.
That's awesome. Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. We've gone from this, kind of dense document to a much clearer understanding of what the Air Force really values in its leaders. So let's do a quick recap for our listeners. What are the key takeaways here?
It really comes down to those 4 MPAs: executing the mission, leading people, managing resources, and improving the unit. These aren't just, empty phrases. They represent the core qualities that the Air Force is looking for.
And it's not just about checking the boxes, it's about consistently demonstrating those qualities, exceeding expectations whenever possible, and showcasing those soft skills: communication, emotional intelligence, adaptability.
And remember, context matters. The panel understands that not every airman has the same opportunities, and they take that into account.
So no matter what your role is or what your career path has looked like, there's a chance to stand out. It's about making the most of your opportunities and demonstrating those leadership qualities in everything you do.
Exactly. And while formal education might not be the most important thing at this stage, the panel really does value those who show initiative in their professional development, taking those steps to learn and grow.
So don't just wait for things to come to you. You need to be proactive and take ownership of your development as a leader.
That's right. And always remember, the Air Force is looking for those well-rounded airmen who can contribute on multiple levels.
Well, I've got to say, this deep dive has been eye-opening. We've really uncovered some great insights into how the Air Force selects its future leaders. But I want to leave our listeners with one final question to think about. We've talked about what the Air Force is looking for. But if you were designing the ideal technical sergeant for today's Air Force, what would they look like? What kind of skills and experiences and personal qualities would they have? What would make them a truly exceptional leader in this crazy world of great power competition? We'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you have any other questions about military promotions or leadership development, you know how to reach us. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.